Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Engaging the Phenomenon. And today we have returning our friend and investigative reporter, Leslie Kean. Welcome, Leslie.
Hi, James. So much fun to be here again.
Likewise. And for people watching and listening, Leslie Kean is an investigative reporter and an author. We'll all know here that she took part in the 2017 article that broke the lid, uh, with Ralph Blumenthal and Helena Cooper regarding ATIP, and that became a huge story. She, also co-authored the article in 2020 with Dr. Eric Davis, making a statement in the New York Times about off-world vehicles, which was a huge victory, I think, a huge win for that in the New York Times to be reported on. Leslie is also the author of UFOs, Generals, Pilots, and Government Officials Go on the Record. And that actually had a forward by John Podesta, uh, which is fantastic. And also the book Surviving Death, a journalist investigates evidence for an afterlife. So it's great having you back, Leslie. And people will uh, probably have read now an article that you recently did for the New York Times regarding Lou Elizondo's book. So, how can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I was actually co-authored with Ralph Blumenthal. I guess all the stories I do for the New York Times we're a team. We always do them together. And that one, it came out. So we had an exclusive from Lou to break the story about his book in the New York Times a few days before. It was about 5 days before the book came out. And so, yeah, we worked with Lou. We worked with a lot of editors at the New York Times to get the story out. It was a real challenge because we were writing about crash retrievals and even bodies and, you know, things that are not easy to get in the New York Times. We had a lot of very intense editing, but the editors they're always really good. We always wish we had more space to say more, but we're happy with the story. And I think it's the fact that we could have the New York Times writing in a serious way about crash retrievals and the program um, was an accomplishment. And I think the way we were able to do it was we were quoting what Lou says in his book. So it's not like the New York Times is saying it. It's Lou Elizondo that's saying it. It was also in the arts section, which is a whole different style of editing, and they have different concerns than the news department, which is who we usually, often write for other stories. So in the arts department book section, you can say more than you might be able to say in a news story. So anyway, I'm really supportive of Lou and his book, and I'm just glad we got the word out in the New York Times, because it adds a lot of credibility to him and his book to be able to do that.
Yeah, it was really great to see that to come out in New York Times, especially before the book release, so
Mhm.
people kind of got the exposure to it. And again, the extent that is discussed in the New York Times regarding UAP or UFOs. I mean, we were even talking before, just saying how far the conversation has come since 2017.
Right.
Are you able to talk about anything that you had wanted to include in the article, but were not able to?
I don't think I can do that, but just to
Oh,
say we had a much longer version of that story, and it was really a matter of how much space the paper could offer us.
yeah.
So there was a lot of trimming that went on from our original piece. I mean, I do think one of the more important things is the story about the green orbs that Lou had in his house. And I think it's important to put that in context, because it was the way we wrote it. It was just sort of like, hey, he had these orbs in his house, and then it goes on to something else. But
Yeah.
it's really important for, I don't know if Lou's going to be, how the sort of skeptics are going to react to that. I mean, hopefully they'll read the book and they'll get the full story. But the idea was that, there were other people as well as him that had the same things going on, other colleagues of his. And there were medical effects from a lot of these orbs that were studied by medical doctors and people that we probably both know, but I won't name. So, it was very much it was documented that these orbs were flying around and doing things to people. and sometimes causing problems for them. And I think when you put it in that bigger context, it's just better for people to understand it that way, rather
Yeah,
than just this one bizarre kind of line about, oh, he had these orbs in his house, you know.
yeah, yeah. And I'm glad that he went to the extent he did and discussed that, because as an experiencer, I've had a lot of encounters with orbs too, even in the house and out in the field and whatnot. And so I think a lot of people that engage with the phenomenon, one way or another, will be able to relate to that. And
Definitely.
and
Yeah.
in my book, as it adds a layer of authenticity to his story, because he's going out of his way to talk about something that's not comfortable, that's not easy to talk about, uh, from somebody who was at the level that he was at with security clearances and working the programs that he did, and his level of involvement. I think it speaks a lot to the reality of the UFO phenomenon, and also to his experiences. So I thought that was very important that he included that.
And I
Uh,
think it also speaks to the wide range of UAP, unidentified anomalous phenomena, right? There are just so many different manifestations of it. And now you have these basketball or baseball size orbs as part of that bigger picture of UAP. And it just shows how complicated and diverse the phenomenon is.
and and
No, it's not just disc-shaped objects or triangles, you know?
Yeah, and more importantly, that those phenomena have been and are being studied.
Exactly.
A
And we
fish
didn't have
on
that in the story, but that's very clear in Lou's book. They are being studied, documented. The medical effects tell the investigators a lot about the actual UAP that caused the medical effects. So they can learn about the different characteristics of the orb by studying how it affects somebody's body, which can often be devastating depending on how close they are. I mean, there's one case that was written about in the Skinwalkers of the Pentagon book where
right.
the orb actually went through somebody's body who was
Yeah.
driving a car, and that person became severely ill as a result. So if anybody sees orbs, don't get too close to them. Although Lou did say that the green orbs are okay. It's the blue orbs that cause the problems.
Yeah, and for whatever reason, I personally came into almost arm's length with yellow orbs before, and as far as I know, there was not a negative health effect or consequence. I didn't get checked for, hey, like doctor, I was up close with an orb,
Right.
but there was a sensation being that close for sure. Almost like an electrical, energetic. I hate to use that word, but quite literally, that kind of sensation or effect. But
Yeah.
we're talking about Luis Elizondo's new book, Imminent, which I recommend to everybody. I got I got a few extra copies, but one extra copy I have, I brought to work and put there, so anybody who's curious can look at that and either grab it and read it or ask me questions or what have you. So I think just putting the book out there is important. But was there anything in the book that surprised you, or that you were not expecting, um or these are a few different questions, so but also stood out to you, like, wow, I never really thought about that in regards to UAP before, or even about Lou?
Yeah, I mean, I think that when I first read it, the overall impression I had was just how extraordinary it was that somebody of his stature is actually stating these things as fact now. There's no hedging. It's like, we are not alone. We have crashed objects, and that's a fact. Whereas, it's usually like, well, possibly we're not alone. Yeah, it was like there was sort of another level to me of certainty and fact in the way Lou presented this information that I found just really compelling. And to me, it was sort of taking it up to another level of disclosure because he was doing that. But I also found, in terms of things that surprised me, I loved when he got personal about how he reacted to things. Like he talked about ontological shock and how he was personally affected by things like Hal Puthoff talking about the physics of general relativity and how that explains how the objects work. To Lou, that was a major turning point, and he was just blown away by it. And other things too. I like, there was one description where he's sitting in his car in the traffic in DC. I don't know if you remember that. And he's just
Yeah.
talking about how his mind is completely blown by these things.
Yeah.
And I really love the fact that he was able to include his kind of personal story, include his family. And it was a much broader presentation than we've ever heard from him before, obviously, because it's a book. But, a lot of the material that he presented was familiar to me, but there's some little juicy gems in there,
Yeah.
things about aerospace companies that have materials and him seeing an implant that actually
Right.
moved.
Yes.
A lot of little tidbits in there that are really interesting. And I think you just get a good picture of who he is as a human being, which is somebody of tremendous integrity and honesty and passion about this issue and really on a mission to try to accomplish something important. And I think he's just taken that to another level with his book.
Yeah, I really appreciate how personal it was. I mean, he really put himself out there, and I mean, in a very kind of way that makes him vulnerable to attack. But I
Right.
mean, he's really laying it all out there, and I have a lot of respect for that, because that's not something that is easy to do, especially when you're talking about your feelings and personal experiences. Not even with the phenomenon and the program, even talking about his early childhood and his mother and those kind of
Right.
things, I think really added to his character, and I think will hopefully humanize him to people, because so often you see all these attacks, and some people just see him as some kind of personality that's out there without seeing the human side. And I think anytime you do that, that's a mistake. Like, you always have to consider, um, anybody that's out there is a human. And I think people just see whatever's in the headline or whatever the is being discussed, and they kind of miss that. And I think that this book really added to his character, and I think give people a better idea where he's coming from, and all the struggle and everything that he went through to do what he's doing.
I agree. Yeah. Yeah. I
And
really respect him for that.
and again, the book honestly exceeded my expectations, and I already told him this. I did not think that he was going to go on the record talking about abductions or implants and non-human bodies and such, to the level that he did. And
Right.
so, and he had to use a pseudonym for somebody who was a doctor. I think in the book
Right.
he's
Everybody knows who he is, but we're not going to say. I mean, a
yeah,
lot of people know who that is. It's
we know
so
who
obvious.
Will Livingston is.
Yeah, we're not going to say it though.
Yeah, no. But I mean, I'm glad that that made it in there. And again, both you and I will know it's great that he went into the Wilson Davis memo. So what did you think about him including that in his
I was
book?
glad he did. I was glad he did. Yeah, the more we can do to move that forward, the better.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
and
Yep.
I was actually also really surprised that he brought up the highly controversial. It's I would say it's more controversial, but it hasn't been in the conversation as much as the alien autopsy email chain, um, between the NIDS group. And I'm really grateful that he included some of the details that I was hoping to learn from what that doctor had seen in those kind of uh, alleged autopsy reports, because in people kind of overlook it a bit, but in that autopsy report, memo or email chain, the doctor is talking about that he was brought into the Pentagon, I think in 1997, 1998, or that something like to that effect, two different times in regards to alien autopsy. And he was shown images, and he couldn't tell whether it was some kind of disinformation, because we all know this individual is highly skeptical, highly intelligent, and at the same time, he's a highly trusted individual who had conducted I don't know, maybe he can't name him because he's still conducting that kind of research, but it kind of gives you some of his perspective, which I've been waiting to hear that, especially in something like Lou's book. So that was really interesting to see. But another topic that made it into the book, which I'm grateful did, was remote viewing and Lou's exposure to that. So what do you think about that being involved in the whole in Lou's book?
I'm glad it was there. Yeah. I mean, it's part of his life, his training, and it probably opened up his perceptions in a certain way. And it deserves credibility as much as anything else does. I mean, remote viewing works, people can do it, and I'm glad he included it.
Yeah. And just to kind of finish off on this part about Lou's book, uh, do you think, or what do you think people should walk away with when reading Lou's book?
I mean, I think it's different for everyone because it depends on how much they already know. But I mean, as far as I'm concerned, what's most important about that book is that it reached beyond the UFO community. It reached the general public, which is why I like to write for papers like the New York Times, because they reach an audience that don't know anything about this. I mean, we forget how many people out there, most people don't know anything about it. So I think what's most important about that book is that it reach a broader audience, and that the major themes that people need to understand is about the legacy program and about the fact that our government does possess these crashed objects. And I think those two things, if they could get out into the general public, into you know, the world out there beyond the UFO community, that'll be a huge accomplishment. That's my feeling about it.
Yeah, and the fact that he has written that basically as a testament in time about the UFO legacy programs, that they exist, and some of what they comprise of. I think again that hopefully reaching millions of people. I mean, he was on Joe Rogan, which for better or worse is a tremendous platform, and he's been on a lot of major media now, which is good to see the conversation completely taken to a different level from where it was just a few years ago. And again, somebody of his level coming forward with that kind of thing.
Right.
But
I mean, you can't read that book and say UFOs aren't real.
yeah,
So, there are a lot of people out there who don't even know that UFOs are a real thing. They don't know our government's been engaging with them. They don't know anything about the 2017 story or the congressional hearings or the legislation. I mean, I just know I talk to people all the time. They just don't know anything. So hopefully this book can reach that kind of an audience. And you're not going to read that book and not get it. It's just impossible. There's so much in there. And given who Lou is, and the level of clearances that he had and everything, it's just very impactful, that book. So I hope that
yeah,
it serves a purpose of broadening the awareness in the general public of what this is all about.
yeah. And I hope people take that to heart, because I remember when your book first came out. I found it in a Barnes and Noble. I remember I still have the original edition, and that's where the conversation was back then, right? It was at 2010 or 2011.
2010, and the conversation at that point, UFOs were not even real. I mean, I made these
Yeah,
4 major points in my book, and I wrote it right out in the introduction. This is what I'm trying to show you. And by the end of the book, I hope you'll understand that these things are true. And the first one was UFOs are a real physical phenomenon. It's like, the second one was, I think that, they can be a national security issue and an aviation safety hazard, and that scientists need to engage with them, and that this taboo is a completely irrational thing. And like all of those things now I mean, everything that my book asked for people to realize has been realized at an official level. So it was amazing for me to see that happen. But it also shows, 7 years before 2017, the fact that UFOs are real was the big effect that book had, right? I mean, that's why I went on major media. It was like, oh my God, maybe they are real. Look
yeah,
look, the military people and pilots are saying. And now it seems like absolute kindergarten level.
Yeah.
So it is really interesting to think about in just those 7 years, and then, the years following 2017, how far we've come. Where it was radical in 2010 to write a book that UFOs are real, Now it's like second nature.
Yeah,
Um,
and I still think that that book is required reading. It's super credible. There's great cases in there, great witnesses, and even I think the Tehran incident, just that is an example of such a great case, and
yeah, I agree.
yeah,
And I
and
think what's powerful in the book is that it was written by
yeah,
the actual Parviz Jafari, he was at that time an Air Force pilot who engaged the UFO. So he wrote it in his own words. And that's one of the things I'm proud about in that book is that there's like 10 or 11, 12 chapters written by other people, not me. So I invited them to tell their stories in their own words. And it's so impactful to read the first person account by this Parviz Jafari, the Air Force pilot who went up and tried to shoot this thing down, and you get to
yeah.
hear him say it, not me.
Well, and I think I mean, people see that as, oh, that's a military incident, but for that individual, that was an experience, that was an interaction.
Mhm.
So, I hope people realize that as well.
Yeah, I mean, he said at the end of his chapter, his biggest regret was that he didn't try and communicate and reach out to whatever it was. He was so focused on self-defense, legitimately so, because they were sending these projectiles towards his plane. But yeah, he wished he had tried to communicate.
Yeah, he wished he had engaged the phenomenon in a different way.
Exactly.
In a
In a
different
different
way.
way, but I don't know if it would have been possible. I don't know if he would have gotten a response. I don't know how he would have communicated with them.
Well,
But
and you know what? And I don't mean to undermine people's level of communication, but just his engagement is a form of interaction, right? There's some kind of back and forth intelligent response. In my own opinion, people will know this via engaging the phenomenon, that I think there are different levels of interaction at play, even if they aren't apparent at the time. So that's something with I think all phenomenology, personal experience, and especially when it comes to the phenomenon. But something that you just mentioned about Lou's book that I want to get into is the UFO Legacy Program. And one of your stories on the debrief with that introduced David Grush and Carl Nell, I think was huge. And you know because prior to that, when I had interviewed Luis Elizondo back, I forget what year it was now, but he had actually mentioned the UFO Legacy Program. But since that term has become part of the vernacular in UFO or UAP studies, we can say. So, what has been your exposure and knowledge of the UFO Legacy Program? I know that's very general, but for
yeah,
starters.
I mean, I've talked to sources for many years who have talked about that program off the record. So it's not a surprise to me. I mean, you know, after my book came out in 2010, then a kind of a lot of doors opened to me for some of these insiders who I began to talk to and get to know. And so, yeah, I mean, that program, I've known about it for a while in terms of my relationship to it. Obviously, I don't know anything classified. I don't know any specifics about it, but I know just about what everybody else knows and what's in Lou's book, you know. And I have talked to other sources, other whistleblower types who either were involved with the program or know a lot about it because of their levels of clearances and their experience. So it's not a surprise to me. I don't think there's any question that that program exists, regardless of what the Department of Defense has to say about it.
Yeah.
And I think eventually it'll probably unravel, but there's a lot of pushback too. So you just have to keep pushing it forward. And one of the problems is that many of these whistleblowers have received harassment or worse as a result of coming forward, and they have to Takes a lot of courage to be willing to risk that and risk your own safety and your job and everything else, your reputation, because you will be attacked if you come forward. So there are more whistleblowers in the private world. There are more whistleblowers than we know who have not come out publicly yet, but who have talked to Congress and the ICIG and people like that, and are just trying to stay safe by not going public.
So I have two questions in regards to that. Number one, do you think that more of them will be becoming public in the near future? And the second part of that would be, when you've talked to these individuals, without naming anybody or being too specific, what is the level of conversation like? Like what are from maybe not even what they directly said, right? Maybe the impression that you received based on what they were able to share. And since you're a journalist and you have certain rights as a journalist and such, where did the conversation go? Like what from your conversations, what do you suspect the UFO Legacy Program consists of?
It's pretty much what the way Lou describes it, and others who have been public about it. David Grush, decades old cooperation between government and aerospace companies to try and reverse engineer these retrieved craft. I mean, it's not that complicated. And they've been able to maintain the secrecy, which a lot of people say it's impossible to maintain that level of secrecy. Well, I don't believe that's true. And neither do other people like Hal Puthoff, who has made the point that we are capable of keeping secrets like that. And he's been involved with a lot of these issues. So yeah, I mean, it's not like I've learned anything that radically different from what is out there, but I've just had more detailed conversations with people and gotten to know some of them. And these people are not making up stories. They're very credible, intelligent, people who care. And I don't know what else I can say, I mean,
Yeah,
Lou's book really reveals a lot about the program. And I think anyone who reads that is going to be well educated about it. There's not a whole lot more other than the specifics. Those are the really juicy parts.
right,
The
right.
specifics that none of us have access to because they're classified, but that we know the members of Congress have access to and the Inspector General has access to. So, those are the key elements of it. And then the question becomes whether investigations will be done to kind of penetrate and get access through some of those details, which isn't an easy process, especially because they're private contracted out to aerospace companies, which makes it much harder for the government or anyone else to get access to information or to penetrate the programs. We saw what happened with Admiral Wilson. If you've read the Wilson memo, which I think most people have, he couldn't get access. So it's not easy, but it's those specifics that are really what's important. And I don't know what they are, but I know it's, names, locations, dates of different events, who's involved, where the things are, and the name, code names, all that kind of stuff is available to members of Congress and others who have the right clearances to have access to that information. And my understanding is that a lot of it corroborates when you have different people bringing forward that information. Things are corroborated, which makes it even more important. And the Inspector General also just, when David Grush was working with the ICIG, the Intelligence Community Inspector General, to form his complaint, that office brought in a bunch of other whistleblowers or witnesses of the types that, because remember, Dave Grush said he interviewed 40 people approximately. So some of those 40 people actually came in and gave testimony to the ICIG, and I can call it testimony because they were under oath. They gave information to the Inspector General of the United States Intelligence Community under oath about these legacy programs. And I don't think anybody is going to do that and lie under oath to the inspector general. They just don't, people don't do that. So, there's a lot of very important information that's been provided at a classified level. And so I think we're all waiting to kind of see what steps are taken, if any, and how that process will work to try to use that information to conduct investigations. And I'm not certain how that happens. It's all behind the scenes and whether it will happen or not. So I think that's sort of where we move forward. And do I think other whistleblowers will come forward? I mean, I think it's possible. And there may be other congressional hearings where people are called in and given protection. And whether they will be people we don't know about yet, I don't know.
Yeah.
But they're there. They're there. And maybe some of them won't even want to testify in a congressional hearing, but there has been, people like Tim Burchett and others have said we are going to have more hearings. So that may be another important next step to see if we do have a hearing. I just think it's going to gradually progress. And then we've got the pending Disclosure Act, legislation that we'll see if that passes this year. That will certainly move things forward a lot if it passes. So,
Yeah. And, part of David Grush's testimony was that, I mean, and this is something I think we almost take for granted in the UFO community, but I'm glad that David Grush said it under, in testimony, that there has been an active disinformation program to deceive the American public in regards to this subject. So do you think that was important that David Grush included that bit in his testimony?
absolutely. Oh, yeah, absolutely. It's important. And some of the Congress people have talked about that.
Yeah, because it was
Yeah.
even included in the language. I mean, that was back when they were trying to form Arrow, that they wanted information on how and why, if there was some kind of disinformation campaign against the American public, basically, which is insane. I regarding the UFOs, yeah, regarding the UFO reality, the UFO subject.
Right.
Um, but also another important claim that was made by people like David Grush, Dr. Eric Davis, and Dr. Jim Lakatsky. So we're talking about two people that worked on OSAP and one on UAP Task Force, all saying that there are intact craft. We're not talking about like a crashed little piece of metal that is we found in the desert.
Right. Right.
Dr. Jim Lakatsky, and I don't know how this is not more talked about, was brought in to a briefing with a senator present, talking about how they had gained access to the
Right.
interior of a UAP. That is just so tremendous.
It is.
And
It
on
is.
the level of somebody like Jim Lakatsky, a brilliant rocket scientist, and a U.S. senator was present for this.
Right.
What do you make of that part of the conversation?
Oh, I just think it's like you say, it's extremely important. It's just one more credible, high level official coming forward and talking about this. And there have been so many of them. And that's a really important piece of it. He hasn't said a lot more about it than, what was that one page in that book,
Yeah.
in the Skinwalker book, but that's absolutely understandable. But yeah, it's extremely important.
I mean,
He's not making up stories.
that's somebody I would love to have called in on one of these hearings
I agree with you. It'd be fantastic.
to
Maybe that'll
testify under
happen.
oath, because that's tremendous,
Right.
and this guy doesn't have like a history of silliness. I mean, he's, as Lou says, maybe one of the most brilliant rocket scientists in the American defense industry.
Mhm.
Um, when you have somebody like that make a claim, again, it's not that he came to that conclusion. He was brought in on a briefing
Right.
with that discussed.
Mhm.
So that's a different story, and that's a different dynamic. This is not some kind of conclusion that he is just investigating UFOs and he thinks that. He was brought into a briefing and told that.
That's right. It's very
So
significant. Very significant.
the
Yep.
yeah, the I think the perspective and the framework on that needs to be recognized for what it is. And I hope that we hear more on that because that's such an important part of this.
Right.
Um,
Would agree.
in some of the whistleblowers that you've spoken to, um, I'm thinking of one in particular. I don't know if he's been ever part of the conversation after his name was exposed. And I'm not even going to say his name here, but I think we're all going to know who we're talking about. Is one of Tom's advisors that we call the general. Were you able to talk to him, or do you know if
No,
he was able to provide any information to the ICIG or
I don't. I just
yeah,
don't. No,
yeah.
no.
I mean, that's somebody I hope is behind the scenes um helping out because I mean that based on certain things that Tom said, man, that guy is definitely somebody that I would assume is on the program as well.
Yeah, could be. I don't know.
Yeah, and which is a different person, so people don't conflate that I'm talking about this person as that person. But Carl Nell, I'm how did that come about that he was included in the debrief article?
Yeah, that was a really important part of that article too, I think. I had and Ralph too, and I had a number of conversations with him before that article, while we were working on the article. And he had to be very careful about what he said at that point. Obviously, he's come much further than that by now, but yeah, and he was just willing to do it because of his respect for Dave Grush, and he'd worked with Dave Grush, and he was willing to come out and just be acknowledge the credibility of Dave in the story, and that was the first time he'd ever gone public was in that story. And of course, since then, he did that amazing presentation at the SALT event in New York, where I was present for that. And that was to think about how hesitant he was in our story in June of 23. And then look at him now, what he said up there on that stage that 10-minute interview or short interview was phenomenal. And I think he's a really important player in all of this.
Yeah,
Really is. He's done a lot of work on the Disclosure Act as well. As everyone knows, he made a presentation at the Seoul conference on that, which was just fantastic. So he's deeply involved behind the scenes. And yeah.
yeah. I recommend everybody watch the SALT talk. I think it was posted on their YouTube, and also the Seoul conference where he gave his talk on uh the UAP disclosure plan,
Hmm.
catastrophic disclosure. And I think it's important to realize, somebody saying the things that he's saying, in the context that he's saying it. I mean, it clearly is informed.
Oh, yeah.
Clearly is informed.
He's a deep insider, well informed, and knows a lot. And he basically laid it out in broad strokes at that SALT conference thing. Yeah. Everyone who hasn't watched that should watch it.
Yeah, I'm going to include links to both those talks. I love the quote that's gone around the world by now in regards to Carl Nell, zero doubt.
Yeah.
Uh,
I know.
phenomenal.
It's just phenomenal to watch him say that.
Yeah, and I hope people don't take this the wrong way, but I would say like this guy seems like I mean like if I had a be a betting man, I'd bet that this guy is like somebody who had some kind of firsthand exposure to the program. If you look at his background, it's just like, yeah, this checks every box that I would check for somebody who is on the program at some level, and he seems like the uh, like the PR for people coming out of the program, white hat kind of thing, where like this is somebody that probably has maybe firsthand knowledge of the program and what it consists of, and is out in the public talking about it in what's considered a safe and responsible way.
Mhm.
You know,
Not
he's
that
not
often, but he does it. Yeah.
right. Um, but one question that has come up, I've asked, both Lou and I've asked Hal and others. I said, where, how far is this thing going to go? I mean, are we going to stop? And so when I asked them, this is before the David Grush came out, actually before and after. Um, are we going to just stop at crash retrievals and technology? Is that where this stops? Are we going to stop at bodies? Like, how far is this thing going to go? And both of them, without hesitation, said all the way. So what are your thoughts on like disclosure, how far it can go and how far it should go?
Wow. You should ask Jim Semivan those questions.
Oh yeah, we're gonna get to that.
You know, I mean, I trust what people like that have to say about it more than what I have to say about it, because everything I know I learned from them. I really don't know. I mean, I find it hard to imagine that our government is some president is going to stand up at the microphone and say, guess what, folks, there's a non-human intelligence. I mean, I don't know how it's going to unfold. I respect with the fact that we're definitely going to keep going with this, and more is going to come out. And whether all the way, I guess that means our officials standing up to the world and telling them that we have crashed objects and we're not alone. I don't know. I mean, ultimately, I think, and this is something, again, I've learned from Jim Semivan and others, that ultimately the non-human intelligence are in control of how all of this unfolds. I mean, maybe that sounds weird to say, but I don't think it's just up to us. And there may be risks, which Lou talks about in all of this coming out, especially if it comes out too quickly. Because again, we don't know much about the intention of the NHI and what they might have planned and why they're doing what they do. And so, I mean, I just feel like the gradual unfolding is definitely the way to go. And ultimately, it'll go where it's going to go, but I don't think it's 100% up to us humans how that's going to happen. And I just think we have to be careful how we do it.
So, and are you referring to potential ramifications from non-human intelligence?
Possibly. I mean, that's what Lou alludes to in his book.
Yeah,
Again, that's taking a purely national security military approach, which is where the world he comes from. And it's a responsible approach to take when you're concerned with defending and protecting our country from all threats, foreign and domestic, right? I mean, they have to consider this as a threat. That's their job. And they have to be focused on it as a national security concern. Of course, there's all these other realms that to the phenomenon that you, of course, understand very well as an experiencer, that, the challenge is trying to put it all together and get an understanding about what this phenomenon is with all the different components of it. So from Lou's perspective, it's a threat. But there may be experiencers who have had certain types of encounters that they feel are really transformative and positive, and they feel they know firsthand what this phenomenon is about in a whole different way than the military sees it. So, you just have to look at this huge spectrum of perceptions, understandings, and experiences that happen with regard to the phenomenon. And I can see all the different sides of it.
yeah. So
But
as
I respect
Leslie,
Lou's opinion. I respect
yeah,
it, what he has to say from his perspective. I don't really have an opinion. I mean, because I just gather it from all these people that I talk
yeah.
to and from what I read. It's not like I have any more
Well, okay. So,
value, in my opinion, than anybody else.
but
I,
just
I
speaking
mean,
as
yeah,
no, go
I would
ahead.
say my key concern right now is how to bring together all the different elements of this phenomenon and to not exclude the experiencer side of it. And I just don't mean by that, I don't just mean abductions. I mean all kinds of experiences and contact and paranormal, also the paranormal effects that occur to people who witness even just an object, right? Their consciousness is affected.
Yeah.
So,
And-
all those mysterious elements of it all have to somehow be put together for us to get a broad perspective of what this really means and what it is. What is the phenomenon? And everybody kind of is in their own on their own path with the way that they've been trained and what their experiences are and what their professional, requirements are, whether they're an academic or a military person or a person who's had experiences or whatever. I mean, I'm very interested in how it all ties together.
yeah.
And I kind of think that's the direction we need to go as, in the broader sense. And I think the Soul Foundation is one group that's really trying to tackle that. They're writing policy papers, but they also want to do stuff with the experiencers. And how do we integrate all of that?
Yeah. And I think,
I don't think we can get an understanding really without doing that.
yeah. And I think also, I'd love to note, Jeffrey Kripal and the Archives of the Impossible and everything that they're doing,
Exactly.
adding another very credible and open, inquisitive approach, and trying to share and get that out in the academic world.
Right.
And I think they've been doing a fantastic job. I can't tell you the amount of academics who have been stepping forward, writing books on it, asking questions, which is what we've needed for so many years. It's finally become safe to talk about it thanks to people like Diana Pasolka and Jeffrey
Exactly. Yeah.
Kripal, and
But they have a perspective that's on one track, and then somebody like Lou has another track. And so
right,
how do you intersect those? And
right,
that's
yeah,
what I see as a really interesting challenge. And one of the things, so in this series, this documentary series that I'm helping to produce, we did season 1 last year for CNN. It actually aired on Nat Geo, but it was originally produced for CNN. We're doing season 2. We've just sort of wrapped the shooting for season 2, and it's going to air in early January. But the reason I bring that up is that one of the goals of that series is to do just what I'm talking about, to kind of bring together the science, the pilots encounters, the nuts and bolts military stuff with the experiencer element. And so out of 6 episodes that we're doing, we have 2 episodes that deal with nothing but experiencers. And what does that mean? And what's happening to these people? And how do they cope with it? And who are the experts that are studying it? We have a lot of interviews with Jeff Kripal and Simon Bressler and people who have done studies on this. And we're trying to bring that into the mainstream narrative, right? Which it has not been part of. It has not been included in the mainstream narrative because people, certainly members of Congress and people like that, are not ready for that. But I think a lot of people are, and certainly the academic community is ready for that because we have them. And so anyway, I'm kind of energized by that component of trying to integrate all of it. And then what do we come out with when we do that? What is this thing? Is it a threat or not? It's a threat maybe in some ways, but in other ways it's not.
yeah,
So, and I'm just really excited about the series that we are able to do 2 episodes. And so that the audience knows, I guess it's the first time
yeah,
to reveal that James is one of our experiencers in that series. And we have a kind of a support group session that's conducted in the series. And James is one of, I think, 5 people who were part of that support group. And James, you were amazing, as were the other experiencers. And it's been an honor to have him as part of it. And I'm just really excited. I mean, the whole series is going to be great, but I'm particularly excited about those 2 episodes with the experiencers, because I think we're doing something different here not in the way we approach it, but also the fact that we're including it at all,
yeah,
in a series that opens up with government and Congress and all this kind of, and then pilot sightings, very concrete stuff. But then we move into that and it's all part of the picture. So I'm really excited about it.
yeah. And again, that just to have that on a major network, or that done in such a serious way, I think is important to move the conversation forward. Because even recently I've talked with people on these interviews and said, how do we how do we do this, right? We have this kind of national security messaging and narrative, and it gets so much attention and it's taken so seriously and it's moved the ball really far, but then also we have the testimony from experiencers and that whole element. And it's, the national security narrative, for better or worse. I'm not saying it's irrelevant or more relevant or what have you. I'm just saying it for what it is, that you have this one element of it, but then there's this whole other one. And,
Right.
how do you reconcile the kind of the seriousness of the national security thing and the progress that messaging has made, but then also trying to include and make known just as seriously of this experiencer element.
Yeah, well, that's the point I'm making. Absolutely. And that's what I hope what the series is going to do.
Yeah.
And so people know the first episode airs on January 8th.
And where is it going to be?
It's going to be on Nat Geo, and then it's going to go up on Hulu and Disney Plus, like immediately after each episode airs. So, yeah, and we're going to re-air season 1. I think Vice is going to re-air season 1 sometime in November.
Yeah.
Also, so people can watch season 1 if they haven't already.
Yeah, and that's the UFOs investigating the unknown, and
Right.
it was so well done. I mean, the season 1, it was super professional, and I thought it was a great. When I was watching it, I was like, I hope they do a season 2.
Yeah, I hope
Such
we
a
get to do season 3. I mean, the company that did it, Breakthrough Films, they're really professional, really good. They understand the topic and they have great editors, and that's why it looks so good. They're just really good filmmakers. They've been making documentaries for a long time. So they brought all their professional talent to this, and they're the same people that did the series based on my book Surviving Death, which was on Netflix, which a lot of people
yeah,
watched.
that
Same
fantastic.
film company. They did such a great job.
And
Yeah.
I am going to want to circle back to more UAP a bit, but I wanted, this is engaging the phenomenon. We talk about consciousness, experiencers, and all that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Even near-death experiences and the broader picture of consciousness and human potential. So I, I'm curious to know how, you went from that UFO book and then you wrote a book on surviving death and that consciousness question. So, what's your journey been like on that? And do you see a correlation or connection between those two?
Yeah, I definitely do. And it's interesting. I mean, I had been interested in that question for many years while I was out doing UFOs. I'd always was kind of exploring that question of, is there any evidence for survival of consciousness past death? And I was first captivated by the stories of young children who had remembered past lives, because that was so black and white. These 3-year-olds would give you 10 facts, and then you could go and verify that the person they said they were actually existed, and there's no way they could know. So, it's very kind of concrete. And that really was kind of a way in for me. And so in 20, I think it was, I don't know, 2014 or something, I just got the idea of doing a book on that because I wanted to be able to research it and bring together the best of a lot of different areas of investigation into that question. There's so many different areas of investigation, but they haven't all been kind of compiled in one book. So my goal was to take the best of near-death experiences, reincarnation cases, mediumship cases, all kinds of stuff. And so that people can read one book and kind of get the best evidence. I was interested in it just because I'd always had that question. And my publisher said to me, do you want to write another book? And I had been thinking about this. So I jumped at the opportunity. And then I kind of went into that world for many years. I mean, 3 or 4 years while I was working on the book, and kind of put UFOs aside. And really, when I was writing the book, I didn't think of them as being connected at all, which is so interesting to me. I thought it's a completely different topic.
Right.
Has nothing to do with UFOs.
Yeah.
And it was very, and it was only afterwards that I started to learn, oh, wait, and I started to learn more about from people who have looked into this that there is some kind of connection, like Whitley Strieber's work and Colin Kelleher's work,
Yeah.
and other areas of investigation just spoke to me about it. And now, of course, there's a lot of discussion about consciousness, as you say, and potential, near death experiences where people see what look like aliens. And, there's just some kind of overlap between the worlds and the dimensions. And we don't really understand that. But so that's sort of my long-winded answer. I mean, I really didn't think of them as connected at all when I wrote the book, but now I'm very curious about what that connection is. And there seems to be some kind of connection,
Yeah.
but I don't understand it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm informed by personal experience, having experienced both, and I don't understand the connection either. So, uh, you
I
know,
know. I don't either, but
it's fascinating though, and it helps you ask certain questions. And um, I mean, I still when I recall those experiences, it still blows my mind. And anytime I contemplate it, I'm still like, I discover different elements of it, and I'm just still blown away, in a good way for me at least. And
yeah,
yeah, the high level of high strangeness and synchronicity and all these things, that it's like, how is that even possible? How is that, how can that even make any sense for any of that to occur the way that it does? There's something that we're not getting.
exactly.
you
There's
know
some big element of reality that we don't understand yet. And that's what's so compelling about it. What is it? What is there out there in reality? I mean, we've got our five, six, or six senses, maybe,
yeah,
that we perceive the physical world and we think that's all there is. But obviously, that's not the case. There's so much more to it. And that's what's compelling and interesting about it, is entering into that reality, that other reality, and trying to discover it not only through direct experience, but also through research. And
yeah,
both are important. Yeah, and like, what is the nature of the reality? That's the bigger question.
right. And
And that
what,
incorporates both UFOs and afterlife stuff.
yeah, and it's
What?
interesting,
Yeah,
Bigelow had OSAP and all that, and now he has the Bigelow Institute for
right.
Consciousness Studies.
That's exactly, that's his interest right now. I
He
was on the board of that
clearly,
organization in the first year when we did the essay contest. So yeah, I learned a lot during that essay contest about the connections too. I mean, I could never pinpoint it, but you just start to get a sense of things overlapping.
yeah. And what are the odds that somebody who's had a near death experience, which is a very like kind of rare experience, thankfully, right? I mean, you don't
Right.
want too many people having that experience. I guess it could be very jarring, and I hope people don't go near death.
Right.
But and then also having UFO experiences, and then on top of that, they're having precognitive events and
Exactly.
all this
Yeah.
other stuff. It's like, how? What are the chances of that? It's just no,
And sometimes the precognition and things develop after either a near death experience or a UFO encounter. They can all have the similar after effects, which is
yeah,
really interesting. Like Elizabeth Crohn's case, where she had her near death experience, where
yeah,
she was struck by lightning. And then she started to have all these precognitive dreams that were absolutely verifiable.
yeah,
Nothing like that before.
yeah.
And
And there's
sometimes people with UFO experiences get that kind of channel opened up as well. And they
yeah,
start developing these psi abilities that they didn't have before.
yeah.
What is that about? It's like we really don't know much about what's going on there, but it's fascinating and worth investigating.
Yeah, and I mean, and very briefly in my experience, I had something that seemed like a precognitive event that led to daytime UFO sighting, that led to something that was akin to a near-death experience, that led to really intense close encounters. And
Right.
in those events, there was this weird perception of time, like that just
Yeah,
it as if it was like one thing. It was really intense.
that's profound. I mean, that's what a lot of people say, that the time is distorted when you're, I don't know if it's distorted, but when you're in these experiences. I mean, Hal Puthoff talks about that.
Yeah,
The
there's
general
something.
explanations of general relativity, that time and space are altered.
Yeah, still, even just contemplating that is, it's still like kind of fries my brain a little,
I
in a
bet.
good way, in a good way. And then I'll have a lot of insights that way, or and then there's the whole question of downloads and what's that about. And I love how that was covered by Dana Pasulka with now we know is Dr. Gary Nolan, and then that guy
Mhm.
Tyler D, who we know who that is, and how that came out into inspirations and technology and all these other things.
Yeah, isn't that amazing that it actually affects technology that
Yes.
humans create through this connection? And it's just phenomenal how connected it all is.
Yeah, and I've also often said, like, I love the UFO phenomenon because it's like a bridge between physics and metaphysics, because we have these like clearly physical objects that can be tracked on radar and taped on gun camera footage, that have biological and physical effects that can be measured and observed and studied.
Mhm.
Yet they have these components that seem metaphysical, um,
Right.
in both the personal experience and the demonstration of an object doing things that don't fit into our box of physics the way that we currently understand it.
Mhm.
Unless we're talking about Lou's book and some of the theories in there, and some of the theories that Hal Puthoff and Dr. Eric Davis have in regards to that in the OSAP DIRD reports,
Mhm.
which people can look at and kind of fry their brain trying to ingest all that stuff. Um, but it's great to see that all that is being taken much more seriously now, and
Mhm.
it's being studied and it's being put out there in the public. So, I mean, I think that just goes to show how far we've come. And and part of that is thanks to the articles that you've written for the New York Times. So, huge congratulations on that. And also getting these shows together and reaching the broader public through these mediums in a very credible and serious way. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you, James, for saying thank you to me.
Yeah. Um, I do have a kind of one-off question. Um, in regards to all the whistleblowers and their testimony, and it's out in the public, and it's not referenced in Lou's book, but the document that, or the email chain that references it is did you ever come across anything um talking about something called Zodiac, or the Zodiac program or project?
I mean, I've heard about that from people I've talked to, but I haven't seen
Yeah.
any documentation or anything on it. So,
Yeah.
and I don't have any inside information on that any
Yeah.
more than what's out there.
Yeah. And George Knapp, when I interviewed him column, I was able to ask them that question in a variety of ways. And George George says, I think Dave might have bumped fists with those guys. And I hope that story comes out. Um, Apparently there is a story to it, but it's just that without people coming forward with their name and their credentials, it's not going to go anywhere. Do you have stories like that, where in the sense where, like, you have the story but you can't go forward on it because the source won't come forward?
Oh yeah, lots of times. Oh my God, Ralph and I, and me alone, but also with Ralph, have spoken to sources with incredible stories and information, and yet they won't go on the record. And so it gives you a lot of great background, but we don't write stories with anonymous sources.
Right.
That's one of our ground rules, and a lot of other people do, but we just don't. And so we're not going to come out with some fantastical story and then say, well, we can't tell you who told us this. It's just not going to work. Whereas, sometimes people do that, but it's certainly not the New York Times news department is not going to even allow that. Although there was one story by Julian Barnes where he seemed to get away with it.
Yeah.
Um, But certainly the reporting that Ralph and I do, which is much more kind of radical in terms of what the Times normally does. Yeah. So yes, the answer is that happens a lot. And I can spend a lot of time following up on conversations with sources like that who tell me fascinating things. And then we'll talk every few months or whatever. And they're nothing that I can ever report on. But at least they help give me the confidence to report on what I do report on. The more people you've spoken to that have told you about crash retrieval programs, say, even if it's off the record, the more confident you are as a reporter to go out with the information, even if you can't name every source, you know. So it's very good to have that deep background as a reporter from as many people as you can.
Yeah. And I think, and it also informs your research, you
Right.
know,
Absolutely. You can put pieces together from different people.
yeah.
But yes, there is so much of it that can't be brought forward all the time.
Is there like one story now that you'd love to report?
Oh, I don't. Yeah, but I'm not going to say what it is.
Oh.
I can't. I can't.
Can you allude to any of it, or is it could be a potential, it could potentially come to light?
I'm hoping that it will come to light. It's just a matter of when that Ralph and I
Yeah.
are onto this really interesting thing that we want to bring forward. But I don't know. You know, there's always a lot of waiting. A source will be confident at 1 month and then pull back 2 months later.
Yeah.
Things like that. It's a very delicate situation. And you, of course, have to respect anybody who doesn't want to risk it. I respect that. It's up to them. I'm not going to pressure anyone. But there are things just out of reach, you know,
And
almost there.
is it, is that information congruent with things that are in Luis Elizondo's book?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, yeah. I mean, I would, yeah. The sources I talk to all pretty much contribute in the same way to the same arena of information. I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, they all kind of complement each other or corroborate each other even.
Yeah.
So, uh, yeah. So there's a lot of time that I spend as a, you know, I mean, like this is the first story, the one in the Times, is the first story that Ralph and I have done for a year since the Dave Grush story.
Yeah.
It's not like we've just been hanging around for that year. We're talking to people all the time and trying to get the right kinds of stories that we can bring to someplace like the New York Times. It just doesn't happen that often. Because we really want to try to focus on staying with the mainstream time, you know, that someone like the Times as best we can, because we feel that's where the impact can really be made at the level, you know, to people like members of Congress and if government officials that are going to take a paper like that seriously. So that's why we try to focus on that. Whereas, yeah, I mean, the Dave Grush story was supposed to come out in the Washington Post with our cooperation, but it never happened. So that's why we ended up with the debrief. But the debrief is fantastic. It's a great place to do stories. I really admire the work they do, and the editors there are great. And it's a great platform for people who don't have access to, you know, whatever else. But I think they're gaining more and more credibility and more respect as a
And
place to do stories on this topic.
do you think, I mean, what do you think is the next level of the conversation? You know, we were at like, wow, there's the UFO program and the US government is studying UFOs and they are real. Now we're talking about crash retrievals, and even David Grush has mentioned bodies and biologics, and Lou has doubled down on that, as you know. Um, and I think that that's an important pivot that we have to make, in the sense that, you know, we even have Carl Nell, like he's talking, you know, Colonel Carl Nell is talking matter of factly about non-human intelligence. We're not talking about random objects in the sky anymore. We're talking about
Right.
technology of unknown origin.
And the legislation, the Disclosure Act, UAP
Yeah,
Disclosure Act does exactly that too. It talks about non-human intelligence at least in a
20.
2 dozen
Yeah,
times or
yeah.
something like that. And it uses the same language that Carl Nell uses and that Lou use to describe what's going on. So, I mean, yes, I think Oh, I think moving forward, I think having more congressional hearings will help a lot. I mean, I sort of see that as kind of the next, because we've got Lou's book. And so everyone's, that has to get out there and be digested. And then hopefully there'll be another congressional hearing where maybe Carl Nell will be called in or Lou will be called in. It'll be more of what David Grush has to say, but from other people as well. I think we just have
Yeah.
to keep getting that out there. And the congressional hearings, I mean, there's no better more better venue for something like this to come forward in, because they're all sworn to tell the
Yeah.
truth, right? And they're
Do
not
you,
going to go into Congress and lie in a big way. I mean, they might people can make a mistake and get a little fact wrong or something, but they're not going to come out with broad sweep statements about crash retrieval programs and so on under oath if they're not telling the truth. That just doesn't happen. So the more people that do that, I think the more credibility it will acquire, and we just have to hammer it over time like that.
and do you suspect what, like, where the conversation will be in those hearings? Like what level the conversation is going to be?
I don't know, because again, there's so much that's classified. And I don't think anyone can really go beyond, but yeah, I don't know. Maybe somebody like Lou Elizondo might be able to provide more detail
Yeah.
than Dave could. And he might know different things than Dave knew. And he might have a way of presenting them without violating national security. I mean, maybe each hearing will go a little bit further.
Yeah. And I think a big part of Lou's book was that he was able to get everything he could approved through DOPS, so he kind of knows the limits, whereas before he had to really toe the line, but now he knows much greater what his limits are based on his
Exactly.
all his firsthand perspective. And I think that's a part of the book, and this kind of like new um reinvigorated campaign of UAP transparency. um and I asked you
And
this.
also Jay Stratton is coming out with a book in another year or so. So
Right.
that'll also be a big moment,
Right.
from him as
Yeah.
well.
Yeah, I'm really interested to hearing more of his perspective and what he has to say, and what he the limits of what he can say as well.
Hmm.
Uh, I know there's a lot of controversy around Lou and Jay and that whole thing right now, and Eric Davis has chimed in, and Eric Davis said on a group or whatever that people have been posting on Twitter, so I'll say it, that he's going to meet with Lou in a week and clear everything up, and I hope that does clear it up. And I know that details are important and people want to know the specifics on that. Um, so I totally understand that. And I hope it is cleared up and that there's less confusion. But I do hope that a lot of people focus on the bigger picture and what's going on and how we can move forward. Uh, that as it is. But I asked you this in a little bit before, but I just want to revisit this theme. Let's pretend Jim is with us of indigestible. Um,
Jim Semivan, you're talking about. Yeah.
yeah. What do you make of there's kind of two kind of big I got three big questions here because I know we're going to be ending this soon. Um, the the kind of theme of that David Grush brought out that I was actually really surprised this ever became part of the conversation is agreements with non-human intelligence. When you hear that, what do you make of that?
I can, if it's coming from a source I respect, I'm willing to accept that that could have happened. But
Yeah.
I don't know for a fact, I just know what people like Lou Elizondo and others say about it.
Yeah. Well, and then, because I'd love to ask Lou, hopefully I can have him on here soon. I'd love to ask him if that maybe, one of the agreements was not to disclose the presence of the non-human
Yeah,
intelligence.
I mean, who knows? And that may be part of the issue with disclosure, if indeed that's the case, but we don't really know. But who
Yeah.
knows if there were agreements, we don't know what they were.
Right. Right. And that's why I think transparency is important because
Mhm.
there's a lot of unknowns around that. And I think, yeah, I mean, we can't make decisions if we don't know what we're dealing with.
Exactly. Well, and in democracy, people are supposed to be informed in order to
Yeah.
have a functioning democracy. So you've got to provide more information.
So,
Absolutely.
uh, you know, you know, what do you think in regards to, and I'm talking to Leslie Kean here, forget about the reporter, Leslie Kean. Should people know everything? Should everybody, in regards to the UFO phenomenon?
I mean, I don't think they should know everything all at once.
Yeah. Do you
I
want to
def-
know everything?
yes, of course I do. I
Yeah.
want to know everything, but I
Yeah.
think the gradual unfoldment is really the way to go. There's no way you can just dump everything out all at once and expect people to assimilate it or not be freaked out by it. Because that's another component of this. If it's not, things can shock people, things can scare people that might be revealed. And even some of the things in Lou's book about what he considers to be a threatening aspect of this could be frightening to people. So I think it's also important not to just destabilize
Yeah.
our culture and our society by shocking people too much, which is, so I just think gradual is the way to do it. And
What
I'm
do
fine with
you,
that.
yeah, I mean, what do you think one of those, like a shocking element could be if you had to speculate?
Oh, that we might be attacked or invaded by NHI. I mean,
Yeah.
Lou alludes to the fact that they might be preparing for some kind of something or other to happen, like
Event.
something
Yeah.
dangerous. We don't know who they are and why they're here, but they're buzzing around and causing near misses with aircraft and coming around our nuclear bases, and they're incredibly powerful. We can't do anything against them. We have no power to stand up to them in any way. They can do whatever they want. They control people's minds. They can influence people's behavior. I mean, if you
Slide
assimilate
9.
all of that and
Yeah.
you accept it, it can be really scary to contemplate. And so everybody's going to react differently, but that's why I do believe that you want to kind of gradually unfold everything because it can be scary to people. And
Yeah.
in fact, my friend Alexander Wendt, the political
Right.
scientist
Yeah.
from
Fantastic.
Ohio State University, is writing a whole book, and I've read chapters of it, and it's excellent about the impact that he believes full disclosure would have on society, and it's not a pretty picture. And he's
He's
a
writing a
political
book.
scientist. Yeah. Oh yeah.
Wow.
I think it's going to be published. I think it's Oxford University Press that's
Okay.
publishing it. Yeah, all about his theory about the risks of full disclosure and how that can impact society. That's really what it's about. And
So
it's really
please,
fast.
please, Leslie, put in a good word for me because I would absolutely love to have him on here and talk to him about this.
I'm sure he'd
Um,
be willing to. I think he would. I don't know. He's working hard on the book right now, and
yeah.
I'm going to be reading more of it shortly, and I'm looking forward to it.
So what do you, I mean, how do you balance that, right? Um, on the idea of we're gradually disclosing and, you know, the idea that maybe we need to be informed.
Hmm.
And are we on some kind of time limit where if we disclose too slow, that we risk the potential for the UFO Legacy Program detractors or the Collins elite to try to shut everything down? Or if we're disclosing so slow that non-human intelligence is able to work its way and prevent that?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's a good question. I don't know what the best scenario is really, but I think everybody involved is doing as much as they possibly can. So it's not really like we're deciding,
Right. Yeah,
okay, I'm going
I
to
get it.
hold back. It just
Yeah.
naturally happens that because of the pushback, because
Yeah.
people can't reveal anything classified, you can only go so far anyway without breaking the law, right? And so it just sort of seems like it naturally evolves, even though we're not consciously saying, okay, I'm going to hold this back for now, but I'm only going
Right.
to say this. I don't do that.
Yeah.
But I think it happens. And I think the fact that so much of it is classified, in a sense, sort of protects us from knowing anything too terrifying, or, it just protects us in a certain way, even though I, of course, would like to know what that information is more than anybody else
Yeah.
out there,
Yeah.
as much as anybody else. But Yeah, I mean, so it's sort of built into the system that it's going to be gradual in that
Yeah.
sense. And maybe eventually, and you know, I think also to remember that what everyone is asking for, like Lou and the others, you know, working along those lines, is not that we reveal national security
Right.
information, obviously, but just that the world has a right to know that we're not alone, that basic fact. And to me, that's kind of like a scientific fact. It's like knowing that the Earth is round and not flat,
Yeah.
or knowing that meteors, rocks can fall from the sky, all the things that we've dealt with throughout history that have been resisted, the thing with Galileo, with the, you know, the Earth not being the center of the universe. It's a major scientific revelation about the nature of who we are and the nature of our cosmos that everybody has a right to know, I think. And I think Lou makes that point very eloquently in his book. And it's not like they need to know what we know about that technology,
Right.
but
Yeah. I
just
mean, I
that
think,
basic reality. We are not alone. And, you know, there is another intelligence, a higher level, or whatever you want to frame it. Why should that, what right does anyone have to keep that scientific fact from the rest of the planet?
yeah.
Just a basic reality that everyone has a right to know, because it changes our perceptions of who we are. It changes our scientific paradigm. It changes our worldviews, and it moves us forward in our evolution to understand that. So I
Yeah.
just think, you know, holding that back, if you look at it from that perspective, it seems kind of insane to me that some military guys think they have a right to restrict the rest of civilization from knowing a basic fact about who we are, which is not a national security fact. The fact that we're not alone is not a national security fact. That's why Lou's allowed to say it
Yeah.
and everyone else says it. But people, we haven't, I guess it's been said many times, but it hasn't been, we haven't crossed a threshold yet where it becomes integrated into the world view and into the international perception of who we are. I mean, that hasn't happened yet, even though people have said it. So it's a question of, when is that tipping point going to happen? And what is going to happen to create that tipping point when it does become an accepted reality for the whole world? And until I think the official government, until the government is willing to come out and say it, which is, I guess, what people define disclosure as, right? It's just not going to cross that threshold, most likely. In a big, you know, internationally, maybe it has to be something that the UN comes out with, and a, you know, united statement from many different countries. I don't know how it needs to happen, but obviously whistleblowers coming forward is not enough to make it happen. And that at that level, we need official acknowledgement of that more than we've got. So that's sort of my perspective on it. I don't think it's something that anybody has a right to hide from the rest of the world.
Yeah. I think it's necessary. And I think through that, we're only going to become more human, you know, in the sense of like all these potentials. Um, and I think that will open the doors again of science, of possibility, and it gives us a bit more context of who we are, in relation to non-human
Exactly.
intelligence and our
Exactly.
place in the universe, right?
Right. Right.
So it it's just a basic fact,
It's a
and
basic fact, and it's being withheld from the rest of the world.
yeah,
You know,
and
if
we
you
need
look at
to
it
know.
that way, and
Yeah,
that's not right.
yeah,
That's not right. And people can adjust to it. I mean, I think there's a lot of concern about panic. And yet again, it'll be interesting to, you know, Alexander Went's book is an important component of the whole
right.
thing. Those kinds of questions are important to consider. And I think his book is going to be a major factor in the discussion. And but you know, ultimately the truth is the truth.
Yeah,
If
and
there's a reaction that happens in society for a while, it'll balance itself out over time. It will be resolved, you know, just like everything else we've gone through in our history.
yeah,
And so you know, the truth has to come out. It's just the nature of evolution.
yeah, and
I
again,
see it.
yeah, it's here, it's present, it's engaging with us. The UFO phenomenon, the non-human intelligence. It's a basic fact. It's the right thing to do, and
Exactly.
we're only going to be better for it.
I
Uh,
agree.
because it's not like people were panicking when they found out the Earth was round that they were going to fly off this rock that's flying through space in an endless.
I mean, maybe some of them did panic, but they got over it.
Yeah,
And it was
I
a smaller, of course, the world wasn't what it is now then. It couldn't, there's no there's no internet or anything like that to kind of blast things out, but and blow things up. But
yeah,
still, it's just something that everyone has a right to know, in my opinion.
yeah, and we've had so much exposure globally to the idea, and as different theologians or religious professors will kind of say is that most of these religions don't exist without non-human intelligence, right? Most of these religions include humans interacting with some kind of non-human intelligence, whether it's an angel or a jinn or a god with a small g, or any of these non-human entities that in their belief are taken very literally. That the as Jeff Kripal would say, religions don't exist without miracles. So if they existed then and in those traditions, why don't they now? So
Right. It's a really interesting component of it, the whole religious realm. And Jeff and Diana are so fabulous at talking about that and putting it in that context and looking at the history through that lens. It's just, I mean, we have Jeff doing that in our series, which he's just so good.
he
Because
is.
we didn't include him in season 1 because CNN would not allow us
Yeah.
to discuss anything to do with experiences, like
Yeah.
nothing. And so this time we've got two full episodes, and Jeff is one of the anchors for all of that. And he's
Yeah.
just so articulate and interesting.
Yeah,
So
I
yeah,
just had him on last week and we
oh,
had a
great.
great talk. His new book, How to Think Impossibly, just came out. And he also announced the next Archives of the Impossible. And I'm really looking forward to that. But yeah, again, I want to thank you so much, Leslie, for coming on here, spending your time and sharing your insights and the information you have and perspective. Is there anything that you want to share that's upcoming, or some perspectives, or some words of wisdom?
Oh gosh, that's
I hit
asking
you
too
with a lot
much.
there. So let's break this down. What's coming out
I
and
mean,
when?
the only thing that I've got coming, well, I've written a play that's sort of on the side, co-authored a play that I'm trying to get produced that has to do with this topic. But also the series that we already discussed, which is, I've been on that full time for about a year, and that's will premiere on January 8th. So there's that. Um, and then I hope to continue doing stories with Ralph. Um, you just never know when something's going to come along.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, okay, we've got it. Let's go. You
Yeah.
know? So yeah, I mean, other than that, and I'm just, following along with what's going on like everybody else is. So I do look forward to the Archives of the Impossible conference that you mentioned in the spring of next year. I think that's and also the Soul Foundation is doing another conference in November in San Francisco.
Yeah.
So I think that and the Archives conference are going to be really important, and both will be great events. And we'll just wait and see if there's going to be more congressional hearings coming up.
Yeah, definitely. Well, again, thank you so much for being here, and I hope to talk to you again soon. And just for people, I don't know if I can say about the play.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the thing you were talking about through
No,
the,
no, no. I
yeah,
know.
it's
Yeah.
just a private project that I've done with a theater friend of mine who's been in theater his whole adult life and
Yeah.
major actor on Broadway. And then we've written this play that has to do with the question of disclosure and the kind of existential ramifications of it on this group of characters who are tasked with making a decision about whether to reveal it or not, basically.
Yeah.
Um, and I love this play. I'm really into getting it produced. We have a really great agent who's shopping it around, who loves the play. He's one of the top agents in all of New York City. So it means a lot that he loved the play without even knowing anything about UFOs. It has to appeal
Yeah.
to an audience that doesn't know anything about UFOs. So there's a drama, there's character development, dramas that go on among the characters, and all kinds of things that make it interesting to a wide audience. It's very provocative. It makes you think about things. And so, yeah, I'm hoping so much we can get a producer interested, and we're working on it. And I think it'll happen. It just takes a lot of time to
Yeah.
make something like this happen. Yeah, so
So
we'll see what
yeah.
happens with that. If anything does happen, I'll let you know, because
Yeah,
I'm
please.
really pretty much more excited about doing that than anything else I'm doing, to be
Yeah.
honest.
Yeah, well, I hope to see it come to fruition.
Thank you.
Um, and yeah, so we'll be in touch, and I hope to speak to you again soon.
Thanks a lot, James.
All right,
Appreciate you having me on.
definitely. Take care.